Northern France, April 1944. The morning haze hangs low over the hedge country, a pale sheet of silver that turns fields into blurred rectangles and rivers into lines of dull glass. A lone Focke-Wulf 190 skirts just above treetop height, weaving between poplars and stone farmhouses, its pilot glancing back every few seconds. He has been chased before. He knows the rhythms of the sky, how long a pursuit lasts, how fast an enemy closes when danger fades, and right now, by every rule he has lived by, he should be safe. If you found this story valuable, a like helps us share more forgotten chapters of history with those who appreciate them. Subscribe if you'd like to see more. Each story we uncover matters, and your support makes it possible to keep these voices from the past alive. Oberleutnant Klaus Richter, 26 years old, veteran of 43 combat sorties, flies with the confidence of a man who has studied his enemy's weaknesses in meticulous detail. The briefing folders at Jagdgeschwader 2 have told him everything he needs to know about the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. The American fighter is powerful but crude, fast in a straight line but clumsy in maneuvers. Its Pratt & Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp radial engine produces impressive horsepower, 2,000 at takeoff, more with water injection, but the turbocharger system is its Achilles heel. Remote-mounted, connected to the engine by long exhaust ducts snaking under the fuselage, controlled by wastegates that respond inconsistently under stress. German intelligence reports, compiled from captured technical manuals and interrogated American ground crew, state with confidence, American radial engines fail under sustained overboost in high-power dives, turbocharger lag creates dangerous power gaps, wastegate inconsistency is a documented defect. Richter has internalized these lessons. He knows that if a P-47 attempts to follow him in a dive, the turbocharger will lag, the engine will choke for breath, and the heavy American fighter will lose momentum at precisely the moment he needs it most. The mathematics are clear. The physics are undeniable. The Americans have built a fighter that looks formidable on paper, but betrays its pilots under combat stress. High above him, perhaps 1,000 meters or more, a dark speck breaks through the haze. Richter does not see it yet. He only hears something. A sound at the edge of perception, a low mechanical roar rolling across the countryside. It seems too distant to matter. Then the sound changes. It becomes a shriek, a tearing, a scream of air and metal rushing through space at velocities that should not be sustainable. Richter jerks his head upward. A P-47D Thunderbolt drops out of the clouds like a falling anvil, nose pinned downward, control surfaces trembling against the force of the dive. It is not gliding. It is not descending in a controlled manner. It is plummeting, accelerating faster than any German pilot would expect an American engine to survive. The aircraft's profile is unmistakable. That massive radial cowling, those broad elliptical wings, the bubble canopy glinting in the pale morning light. But the speed is wrong. The angle is wrong. Everything about this dive contradicts what Richter has been taught. He feels a chill that has nothing to do with the cold air rushing past his canopy. He knows the stories. American radial engines choke in high-power dives. Their turbochargers lag behind throttle inputs. Their boost pressure fluctuates unpredictably. Their wastegates misbehave under rapid altitude changes. They blow cylinders. They cannot stay in the dive long without seizing. Every Luftwaffe briefing reinforces the same doctrine. The Thunderbolt is heavy, clumsy, and mechanically fragile under stress. So Richter banks right, confident the P-47 will overshoot, flame out, or simply lose momentum before closing the gap. He has executed this maneuver dozens of times against American fighters. The tactic is sound. The physics support it. The intelligence confirms it. But the dive does not weaken. The roar gets louder, so the silhouette gets sharper, growing from a speck to a shape to a machine, hurtling toward him with impossible velocity. The mechanical flaw in the Thunderbolt's turbocharger system, the one German intelligence confidently reported, the one Luftwaffe tacticians built their doctrine around, is doing something no German predicted. It is feeding the dive. Inside the P-47D cockpit, First Lieutenant Mike Donovan, 61st Fighter Squadron, 56th Fighter Group, feels the familiar tremor through his boots as the turbo lag catches up. For 2 long seconds after pushing into the dive, the mighty R-2800 had been quiet, its power curve flat, almost hesitant. The manifold pressure gauge held steady at 41 inches. The tachometer showed 2,550 RPM. The aircraft descended under gravity and momentum, not thrust. This is the moment German pilots have learned to exploit. The lag, the gap, the window where the Thunderbolt seems vulnerable. But now, right now, the imperfect wastegate snaps open wider than it should. Raw boost floods the intake manifold. The 18 cylinders arranged in 2 radial rows drink deeply of supercharged air. The turbocharger, spinning at over 20,000 RPM in the slipstream behind the cockpit, suddenly delivers pressure the engine was not quite expecting. The R-2800 does not hesitate. It does not choke. It roars. The aircraft surges forward like a sledgehammer thrown off a cliff. Donovan feels the acceleration press him back into his seat, feels the control stick grow heavier as airspeed climbs past 400 miles per hour, then 425, then 450. The wings shudder but hold. The frame groans but does not buckle. The engine temperature rises but stays within tolerances. Everything about this moment defies the careful German calculations. Richter's calculation collapses instantly. He expected an engine struggling for breath. He gets a monster gathering speed at a rate no Focke-Wulf 190 can match. The Thunderbolt is gaining over 250 miles per hour in a matter of seconds, not through smooth acceleration, but through a violent, unpredictable surge that arrives precisely when German doctrine says it should not. Richter hauls back on his stick, pulling into a hard brake turn that normally forces any pursuer to overshoot. The FW-190's superior roll rate should give him the advantage. His lighter wing loading should allow a tighter turn radius. But the Thunderbolt does not overshoot. It angles with him, still diving, still accelerating, the air screaming along its thick wings. The American pilot is not fighting the dive. He is riding it, using the surge, trusting something Richter cannot see or understand. For a split second, both aircraft hang in a violent geometry that should not exist, a nimble German fighter trying to turn inside a falling American sledgehammer. Donovan squeezes the trigger. 8 M2 Browning 50 caliber machine guns erupt simultaneously, 4 in each wing, each weapon cycling at 800 rounds per minute. The combined firepower, 6,400 rounds per minute, 200 pounds of lead and steel per minute, stitches an incandescent line across the hedge country. Richter snaps into a desperate barrel roll, but he is already behind the curve. The first rounds punch through his wing root, tearing through aluminum skin and severing control cables. The second burst walks across his fuselage, shattering the canopy frame and destroying the oxygen system. His aircraft wobbles, drops a wing, and plunges toward the fields below. In the Thunderbolt cockpit, Donovan finally pulls out of the dive, the G-forces slamming him against his straps with enough violence to gray his vision at the edges. The engine groans, cylinders protesting the abuse, but it holds. It always holds. He levels off at 8,000 feet, breathing hard, eyes scanning for more threats. Below him, the FW-190 lies broken in a burning scar across a French orchard, black smoke rising into the morning haze. And in that moment, one truth becomes clear. The flaw that German pilots trusted, the flaw they thought would save them, is the flaw that just killed one of their own. The Thunderbolt's weakness is not weakness at all. It is a nightmare disguised as a mistake. Long before the Thunderbolt plunged out of the clouds onto that Focke-Wulf 190, The Luftwaffe had already built a mythology around the P-47. A mythology born from engine diagrams, pilot rumors, and half-understood technical briefings. To German pilots, the Thunderbolt was powerful but crude, fast but fragile, a brute wrapped around an unreliable heart. The source of the myth was simple. The P-47's turbocharger system looked like chaos. From the outside, the Thunderbolt appeared thick and overbuilt, 10 tons of aircraft wrapped around a single radial engine. But beneath its skin lay a labyrinth. Long exhaust ducts running backward under the fuselage. A remote-mounted General Electric-type B-2 turbocharger positioned far from the engine itself, driven not by mechanical linkage, but by exhaust gases channeled through pipes, plumbing that snaked like intestines through the airframe, wastegates controlled by finicky linkages and pneumatic actuators, boost pressure that lagged, surged, and sometimes behaved unpredictably. German intelligence reports seized on these quirks with enthusiasm. The reports were confident, authoritative, and wrong in the most dangerous way possible. One document circulated among fighter groups in late 1943 stated, "American radial engines fail under sustained overboost in dives. Wastegate inconsistency is a known defect. Pilots report power loss during rapid altitude transitions." Another report, compiled by Luftwaffe Technical Intelligence at Rechlin, warned that the Thunderbolt's turbo lag left it vulnerable during steep dives, especially when transitioning from level flight to vertical descent. The engine, the report claimed, could not deliver consistent power during such maneuvers. A Luftwaffe instructor at Jagdfliegerschule 4 summarized it bluntly to his trainees. "If the P-47 tries to follow you down, its engine will betray it. The turbocharger cannot respond quickly enough. The wastegate will fail to regulate boost pressure. The American pilot will find himself in a dive with an engine that hesitates when he needs power most. That is your window. That is when you turn and kill him." This belief spread like wildfire, partly because it made intuitive sense to pilots flying precise, tightly tuned German engines. The Daimler-Benz DB605 and the Messerschmitt Bf 109G used a mechanically driven supercharger with carefully calibrated boost stages. The BMW 801 in the Focke-Wulf 190 employed a sophisticated engine management system that automatically adjusted mixture, timing, and boost pressure. These were precision instruments, engines that rewarded careful handling and punished abuse. To German pilots and engineers, the Thunderbolt system looked undisciplined, a machine that tolerated imperfection only because Americans built parts by the thousands and could afford to replace what broke. Even some American pilots internalized the doubts. They joked about the lazy turbo, the late punch, the hiccup you could feel at altitude when the wastegate took its time opening. A few swore it was a manufacturing defect, variations in tolerances between aircraft built at Republic's Farmingdale plant versus those from the Evansville factory. Others insisted ground crews were too swamped to calibrate the wastegates properly, that the system needed constant adjustment to work correctly. And ground crews, they did not argue. They did not deny it. They simply smiled, wiped their hands on oil-stained rags, and said, "It'll run, trust me." To outsiders, that sounded careless. To Luftwaffe analysts, it sounded damning. To pilots fresh from P-51 Mustang demonstration flights, where the Rolls-Royce Merlin's two-stage supercharger delivered smooth, predictable power, the Thunderbolt's behavior sounded primitive. But here is where the myth rotted from the inside. German assumptions were built on German expectations, not American reality. They assumed a flaw made a fighter vulnerable. They assumed mechanical inconsistency meant fragility. They assumed an unpredictable system was a weakness to be exploited. Every part of that logic was wrong, because the Thunderbolt did not need precision. It needed tolerance. It needed brute endurance. It needed a system that could take a punch and deliver one back harder. The R-2800 Double Wasp did not behave like a DB605 or BMW 801. It did not fail when pushed past limits. It thrived there. 18 cylinders arranged in 2 radial rows, each cylinder displacing 155 cubic inches, total displacement 2,804 cubic inches, nearly twice the size of German inline engines. Air-cooled, not liquid-cooled, which meant no radiators to puncture, no coolant to leak, no vulnerable plumbing to sever. The engine could lose 2 cylinders and keep running. It could tolerate overboost that would destroy a German engine. It could absorb battle damage that would ground a Bf-109 permanently. The wastegate flaw that made German engineers cringe gave American pilots sudden bursts of power Germans could not calculate. Turbo lag was not hesitation. It was a slingshot. The uneven boost that looked sloppy on paper became a weapon of timing in a dive. German pilots thought unpredictability meant vulnerability, but in a dogfight, unpredictability is terror. The Luftwaffe believed the Thunderbolt would choke under stress. Instead, it delivered its deadliest acceleration during stress. The flaw they mocked, the flaw they trusted, was the flaw that flipped every engagement they thought they understood. Myths live comfortably in classrooms and briefing tents, but the sky is not comfortable. The sky ends myths with speed, pressure, and gravity. And what German pilots discovered, too late, too often, was that the Americans had never fixed this flaw because they had discovered the truth first. It was never a flaw at all. It was a hidden weapon. To understand why American mechanics never fixed the P-47's supposed flaw, you have to step away from the cockpit and into the controlled chaos of a 1944 fighter group maintenance line. A world of oil-soaked jackets, half-burned coffee, pounding pneumatic tools, and an R-2800 roaring on its test stand so loudly that conversation becomes a game of reading lips. Because the truth is this: the flaw was not an accident. It was a decision, a deliberate choice made by people who understood the Thunderbolt in ways engineers back in the States never could. Boxted Airfield, England, February 1944. Staff Sergeant Leo Rust Carver stands in the maintenance bay of the 61st Fighter Squadron, 56th Fighter Group, wiping his hands on a rag that has not been clean in 3 months. Around him, the organized chaos of a frontline maintenance operation unfolds with practiced efficiency. Crew chiefs crawl over P-47D airframes, inspecting control surfaces, patching bullet holes, replacing worn components. Armorers reload ammunition belts for the 8 M2 Browning machine guns, each aircraft requiring 3,400 rounds, 425 rounds per gun. Fuel trucks pump 305 gallons of 100-octane aviation gasoline into wing tanks. Oxygen bottles are swapped, radios tested, propellers inspected for nicks and cracks. But Rust's attention is focused on something smaller, something most people would never notice. The wastegate linkage on Lieutenant Donovan's P-47D, serial number 42226641, is slightly loose. Not broken, not damaged, just loose enough that the mechanical connection between the cockpit control and the turbocharger's wastegate valve has a small amount of play, perhaps 2 or 3 millimeters of slack in the linkage rod. By every technical manual, every factory specification, every engineering standard, this is a defect that should be corrected immediately. Republic Aviation's Maintenance Manual, Technical Order 01-47DB2, specifies wastegate linkage tolerances of plus or minus 0.5 millimeters. The linkage on Donovan's aircraft exceeds that tolerance by a factor of 5. An inspector from Republic would write it up as a discrepancy requiring immediate correction. An engineering officer fresh from the States would order it tightened to specification. Rust leaves it exactly as it is. More than that, he deliberately maintains that looseness, checking it every few days to ensure it has not tightened on its own, occasionally adding a tiny amount of slack if the linkage begins to bind. He does this quietly, without fanfare, without writing it in the maintenance logs, And he does it because he has learned something the engineers at Republic Aviation's Farmingdale, New York factory have not yet discovered. The loose wastegate linkage is killing German pilots. Rust keeps a small, battered notebook tucked into the chest pocket of his jacket. It is not a diary, nor a manual, nor anything official. It is simply where he writes down the truths the war teaches him. Truths the engineering officers back in the States never see. And truths that slowly reveal why the P-47's so-called flaw is not a weakness, but the beginning of a nightmare for the Luftwaffe. His entries do not try to impress anyone. They are short, clipped observations born from long nights and burned knuckles. But taken together, they tell the real story of the Thunderbolt's power curve, its unpredictable timing, and the terrifying advantage hidden inside imperfect machinery. February 11th, 1944. After a dive test over the channel, Rust writes, "Turbo slow to respond. First, 2 to 3 seconds, then hit like hammer. Manifold pressure jumped 41 inches to 59 inches instant. Pilot described sensation like someone shoved plane from behind. Surge not harmful. Engine temp holds. Might be useful." At the time, he does not yet understand how useful. The P-47's heart is its turbocharger system, a marvel of industrial engineering, but also one of the strangest pieces of machinery ever installed in a fighter aircraft. Unlike German engines where everything is bolted tightly around the crankcase, the P-47 runs its General Electric Type B2 turbocharger far behind the engine, positioned in the lower rear fuselage just forward of the tailwheel. The connection is not mechanical, but pneumatic. Exhaust gases from the 18 cylinders are channeled backward through ducts, driving the turbine wheel at speeds exceeding 20,000 RPM, which in turn compresses intake air and forces it back forward to the engine's supercharger. It is an absurd arrangement. It is inefficient by traditional standards. It looks fragile, and on paper, it is fragile. Wastegates need precise calibration to prevent overboost. Boost lines need to stay balanced to avoid surging. Turbo response depends on perfectly timed airflow through ducts that snake the entire length of the fuselage. Too much lag means delayed power. Too much surge means dangerous overboost that can destroy an engine in seconds. A German mechanic would insist on tightening everything until it sang in perfect harmony, adjusting linkages to factory specifications, calibrating wastegates with micrometer precision, ensuring every component operated within its designed tolerances. A Luftwaffe ground crew would spend hours fine-tuning a BMW 801 or DB 605, treating the engine like a precision instrument that demanded respect and careful handling. Rust wipes sweat off his forehead and mutters, "Perfect costs time. Time we don't have." Because while German fighters live in a world where a handful of elite ground crew pamper them each morning, the Thunderbolt lives in a world of mud, rushed turnarounds, and a sky that demands every aircraft fly as often as possible. The 56th Fighter Group operates under relentless tempo. Bomber escort missions to Germany require maximum effort. Every available aircraft, every available pilot. Maintenance windows are measured in hours, not days. Ground crews work through the night to prepare aircraft for dawn missions, then work through the day to repair battle damage and prepare for afternoon missions. Factories back home send instructions, sync the wastegates, calibrate the system, eliminate lag. The front line laughs and throws the papers aside, not because they do not understand, but because they understand better than the people who wrote the manuals. They have seen what happens when they dial the system correctly. Smoother throttle response, yes. More predictable boost, yes. But slower dive acceleration and reduced punch during turbo spool-up. And in 1944, the air war over Europe is not about smoothness. It is not about elegance. It is not about perfect manifold pressure curves. It is about murdering enemy fighters before they murder bombers. March 8, 1944. Rust's notebook. Maintenance run. R-2800 endured estimated 40% overboost for 15 seconds. Cylinder temps rose but stabilized. No detonation, no cracked plugs, no warped metal. Beneath the data, 4 words. This engine wants violence. To a German mechanic, that would be mechanical heresy. To Rust, it is simply how the engine behaves under pressure. The R-2800 Double Wasp is not a precision instrument. It is a blunt instrument, designed and built with tolerances that would horrify German engineers. Pratt & Whitney's design philosophy emphasizes ruggedness over refinement, reliability over elegance. The engine can tolerate abuse that would destroy a DB605 in minutes. Push a Daimler-Benz DB605 beyond its limits, and it dies quickly, snapping connecting rods, cracking cylinder blocks, melting pistons under detonation. The engine is powerful, efficient, and sophisticated, but it demands respect. Exceed manifold pressure limits, and the engine will destroy itself. Allow cylinder head temperatures to climb too high, and the engine will seize. The DB605 is a thoroughbred racehorse, magnificent when properly handled, fragile when abused. The R-2800 is a draft horse. Push it beyond limits and it coughs, kicks, then keeps running. Overboost by 40% and it snarls and surges forward. Mistime the wastegate, and it rewards the pilot with a late, brutal punch of power. Lose 2 cylinders to battle damage and the remaining 16 compensate. The engine does not demand perfection. It tolerates imperfection and converts it into tactical advantage. The wastegate flaw, that unpredictable, slightly delayed turbo response, becomes a quiet gift. It creates a weird, beautiful sequence in a dive. Lag, silence, sudden violent power surge. That surge comes at the exact moment German pilots expect a Thunderbolt to struggle. So maintenance crews, without ever writing it down, adopt an unofficial doctrine. Do not overfix the R-2800. Let it breathe like it wants to. They leave tolerances roomy. They let linkages stay slightly loose. They allow turbo lag to exist, even expand, because they learn something the engineers do not know. The R-2800 can take punishment. German engines cannot. March 19, 1944. Rust's notebook records something purely tactical. Chase. Thunderbolt closed 1,000 meters to 600. In span pilot barely had time to curse. FW-190 broke early. Poor escape turn, killed. Rust does not dramatize it. He simply writes, German escape window 1.2 to 1.5 kilometers. Thunderbolt closes in 0.6. They don't know our timing. American logistics amplify the effect. Spare parts flow constantly across the Atlantic. Replacement engines arrive in wooden crates, preserved in Cosmoline, ready to install. Maintenance bays can tear down and rebuild an R-2800 in 8 hours, not 3 days. Crews do not need fragile precision. They need rugged consistency. The Luftwaffe has none of this. German engines are masterpieces, but masterpieces demand care. Too much care for a war that is no longer going their way. BMW 801 production struggles to meet demand. DB605 engines require specialized tools and trained mechanics. Replacement parts are scarce. Maintenance takes time that Luftwaffe units no longer have. German ground crews perform miracles keeping aircraft operational, but they are fighting a losing battle against attrition, supply shortages, and the relentless tempo of Allied operations. March 29, 1944. After a controlled dive test, Rust notes, aircraft dropped 18,000 feet, gained 240 mph in 17 seconds. Surge arrived late but violently. Pilot described sensation, falling twice at once. Timing unpredictable but repeatable. An engineer's contradiction, but a mechanic's goldmine. He writes, unpredictable to them, familiar to us. April 4, 1944. Rust writes down a fragment of captured intelligence, a Luftwaffe briefing document recovered from a shot-down Bf-109. P-47 engines cannot survive rapid dives. American mechanics cannot tame their turbo. Thunderbolts panic under pressure. Rust responds in one flat line. Good. Let them think that. The Flaw is doing more damage in German briefing rooms than in American engines. Every Luftwaffe pilot who believes the myth enters combat with a fatal miscalculation built into his tactics. Every German who trusts that the Thunderbolt will choke in a dive is trusting a lie that will get him killed. April 10th, 1944. Rust's entry is almost philosophical. After another inspection, he finds turbine blades showing minor wear after repeated surges, ducting still intact despite heat spikes, wastegate linkage once again slightly loose. He notes that he could tighten it, but tightening kills the surge. Then he writes the sentence that defines the entire Thunderbolt maintenance philosophy. Perfect setting slows the fighter. Imperfect setting saves it. As weeks pass, Rust adds something new. Pilot impressions. They are not technical, but they are consistent. Lieutenant Donovan says the Thunderbolt waits for the right moment. Captain Harris says it breathes in before it swings. Lieutenant Morrison says the surge feels like the plane knows when to strike. Rust does not believe machines have instincts. He believes they have patterns, and the pattern, once visible, is undeniable. The Flaw creates the timing that pilots feel. The loose wastegate linkage introduces a delay that allows boost pressure to build behind the wastegate valve. When the valve finally opens, slightly later than it should, slightly more abruptly than it should, the accumulated pressure floods the intake manifold in a surge that feels like a second engine igniting. German pilots calculate their escape maneuvers based on linear acceleration curves. They expect the Thunderbolt to gain speed steadily, predictably. Instead, they encounter a fighter that accelerates in stages: normal, lag, explosion. The lag creates a false sense of safety. The explosion destroys that safety before the German pilot can react. His final note before D-Day is simple but prophetic. If Germans ever realize surge is predictable only to us, they'll change tactics. They haven't. They won't. They trust the myth. We trust what we see. Rust closes that entry with one last line, the most accurate summary of the Thunderbolt's hidden edge. The Flaw becomes the knife because they never look where it cuts. In the end, the numbers that matter most are not the ones shouted in pilot briefings or printed in technical manuals. They are the ones whispered from the back of a mechanic's notebook. Numbers that explain why the P-47 kills faster, closes harder, and terrifies pilots who never understand how a supposed defect becomes a weapon. The loose wastegate linkage, the delayed surge, the unpredictable timing that is only unpredictable to the enemy. These are not accidents of manufacturing or failures of quality control. They are deliberate choices made by men who understand that war does not reward perfection. War rewards what works, and what works, in the spring of 1944, is a flaw that German intelligence documented, German pilots trusted, and German doctrine built tactics around. A flaw that is killing them. The duel that proves everything about the Thunderbolt's flaw does not begin with a dramatic chase through the clouds or a perfectly timed ambush. It begins with noise. Clipped, overlapping, frantic noise. The kind that fills a squadron frequency when pilots are juggling survival and disbelief in equal measure. For once, the story is not told through slow motion, second-by-second breakdown. It is told the way it was lived, through the garbled, half-panicked voices of men in the sky and the calm, exhausted handwriting of the crew chief who listens to the debriefing afterward. April 12th, 1944, 15:42 hours. Extracted radio traffic. 61st Fighter Squadron, 56th Fighter Group, operating over the Ardennes sector of northeastern France. 1542-11. Blue 3, contact. FW 190, low left of the rail line. He's running for the deck. 1542-14. Blue leader to 3. Do not dive after him. You'll lose boost. Hold altitude. 1542-18. Blue 3, negative. He's too fast. Going down. 1542-22. Blue leader to 3. Your turbo won't keep up. He'll shake you. 1542-26. Blue 3, copy. Dropping in. The ground crew later replays these recordings in the tent behind the maintenance line. They have heard this argument 100 times. The pilots believe the dive will starve the turbo. The mechanics know the dive will wake it up. 1542-39. Blue 3, lagging, still lagging, losing pressure, hang on. 1542-44. Blue 3, Jesus, boost just jumped, axle spike, closing fast. 1542-47. Blue leader to 3, what did you hit? 1542-49. Blue 3, nothing. Turbo just kicked like a damn mule. The squadron log captures the next gap in transmissions as combat maneuvering, but Rust Carver later annotates it in the margin of his notebook. That's the wastegate staying loose. That's why we don't fix it. The German pilot, Unteroffizier Franz Becker, 23 years old, Jagdgeschwader 2, does not have the luxury of radio commentary. He is alone in his Focke-Wulf 190A8, engine roaring at emergency power, altimeter unwinding as he drops toward the deck. He has executed this maneuver 17 times in the past 4 months. 17 times, he has escaped pursuing American fighters by diving to treetop height, where the hedge country's terrain offers cover and the Americans' heavy fighters lose their advantage. The tactic is sound. It is proven. It is doctrine. Drop low, force the Americans to follow into rough air where their weight works against them. Exploit the moment when their engines choke and their speed bleeds away, then brake hard into the maze of fields and forests where visual contact becomes impossible. Becker has survived this long because he trusts the tactic and because German intelligence has told him the Americans' engines cannot sustain high-power dives. But today, something is different. The Thunderbolt behind him does not flatten out. The sound of its engine, that distinctive roar of the R-2800 Double Wasp, does not fade. Instead, it grows louder, closer, more urgent. Becker glances back and feels ice in his stomach. The P-47D is gaining, not slowly, not gradually, gaining with a velocity that makes no sense according to everything he has been taught. Post-capture interrogation. Unteroffizier Franz Becker, April 13, 1944. Recorded by 8th Air Force Intelligence. I dropped low to escape. The American dove after me. I expected his engine to choke. It did not choke. It accelerated. It accelerated again after it should have stopped. I turned early because he should not have been able to follow. But he was already in firing range. I thought my altimeter was broken. The transcript ends with a short line. I never saw an aircraft gain like that in a dive. I survived only because I bailed out. His aircraft did not. Back to the radio, April 12th, 15:44 hours. 15:44:02. Blue 3. He's braking, rolling left, trying for the hedge. 15:44:05. Blue leader. If he gets into that maze, you're done. 15:44:09. Blue 3. Not today. There is a brief crackle of gunfire, distant but clear through the radio static. 8 M2 Browning 50 caliber machine guns firing in unison, 6,400 rounds per minute combined, each round weighing 1.7 ounces, traveling at 2,900 feet per second. The sound lasts 3 seconds. 15:44:13. Blue 3. Hits. He's venting. Coming apart. 1544-16. Blue leader. You overshoot? 1544-18. Blue 3. Negative. Surge kept me on him. 1544-22. Blue leader. Say again? 1544-24. Blue 3. I said the surge kept me on him. The Flaw did it. The last sentence is faint, almost swallowed by static, but the maintenance crew hears it because they are expecting it. They have heard variations of this statement dozens of times over the past 2 months. The pilots are beginning to understand what the mechanics already know. After-action debriefing. 61st Fighter Squadron Operations Tent. Boxted Airfield. April 12, 1944. 17:30 hours. Lieutenant Robert Blue 3 Morrison returns to base with fuel low and nerves still shaking. He sits on an overturned oil drum, helmet off, hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. The intelligence officer, Captain James Wheeler, offers him a clipboard. Morrison does not take it. Instead, he speaks slowly at first, then faster as the shock wears off. I dropped through 12, maybe 13,000 feet. I felt the usual lag, the dead spot. I thought I'd lose him. I thought the briefing math was right. Morrison pauses, accepts a canteen of water, drinks deeply. But then the boost spiked. Not smooth, violent, like being kicked in the spine. The airspeed shot up. I think I gained 40, maybe 50 miles an hour in a handful of seconds. Captain Wheeler writes quickly, trying to capture the exact phrasing. And the enemy aircraft? The pilot didn't expect it. He did what they always do. Turned early, thinking I'd overshoot. Only I didn't. I stayed inside his arc. I shouldn't have been able to, but I did. Morrison looks up, meets Wheeler's eyes. That's when I realized the thing we call a mistake is the reason we can catch them. Wheeler asks if Morrison noticed any engine knocking, overheating, or signs of overstress. Morrison laughs, a sound without humor. Signs? The whole airplane was screaming, but it held. It always holds. Crew Chief's notes, written by Staff Sergeant Rust Carver. April 12, 1944, 2140 hours. Maintenance Bay, Boxted Airfield. Rust sits on a crate with a lantern and a cup of coffee that has gone cold. Around him, the maintenance bay is quiet, except for the occasional clang of tools and the low conversation of night shift mechanics. He opens his notebook and writes, Pilot confirms predictable 2-second lag followed by surge. Surge appears sharper after long idle. Wastegate linkage still loose by a hair, leaving it that way. Turbo housing shows soot pattern consistent with rapid spool. No cracks, no warping. R-2800 temps elevated but safe. German aircraft recovered with right wing torn. Control cable severed. Pilot bailed out. Then Rust adds a single line beneath the technical facts. The kind of line only a mechanic would think to write after watching a pilot come home shaken, but alive. They think the Flaw betrays us. They don't understand that the Flaw betrays them. The engagement lasts less than 1 minute from first contact to kill. The German pilot's assumption, shared by hundreds of his comrades, is that the Thunderbolt cannot maintain its breath at high stress. Instead, the flawed timing of the turbo gives the American exactly what he needs, a burst of acceleration that turns a predictable dive into an unanswerable attack. There is no second-by-second drama for a camera. There is only the raw testimony of radios, wreckage, and a pilot who returns with shaking hands and a single sentence that captures the truth more cleanly than any engineering report. The Flaw caught him, not me. But April 12th is not an isolated incident. It is a pattern, repeated across the skies of France and Germany throughout the spring and summer of 1944. The pattern becomes visible only when intelligence officers compile engagement reports, cross-reference them with Luftwaffe loss records, and begin to notice something statistically significant. 8th Air Force Intelligence Summary, May 1944, classified secret, declassified 1973. Analysis of air combat engagements, March-April 1944, indicates P-47 Thunderbolt units achieving higher kill ratios in vertical pursuit scenarios compared to P-51 Mustang and P-38 Lightning units operating in same sectors. Initial hypothesis attributed this to superior dive speed. Detailed pilot debriefs reveal consistent pattern. Enemy aircraft initiating escape maneuvers at calculated intervals based on expected P-47 acceleration curves. These calculations prove incorrect. P-47 acceleration in dives demonstrates non-linear characteristics, specifically delayed initial acceleration followed by rapid acceleration spike, that enemy pilots do not anticipate. Result: enemy escape maneuvers initiated too early, placing enemy aircraft in vulnerable position when P-47 acceleration spike occurs. Recommend further study of P-47 dive characteristics. The recommendation for further study is filed and forgotten. The war does not pause for academic analysis, but the pattern continues and the statistics accumulate. By summer 1944, Luftwaffe tactical doctrine begins to shift. New briefing documents warn pilots to avoid vertical engagements with P-47 units. The warnings are vague, lacking technical specificity, because German intelligence still does not understand what is happening. They know the Thunderbolt is dangerous in dives. They do not know why their calculations keep failing. Ardennes Sector, June 8, 1944, 2 days after D-Day. The Luftwaffe sends out a Gruppe of Focke-Wulf 190 Jabos, fighter bombers, tasked with striking Allied supply lines. These are veterans of low-altitude strikes, men who trust the ground more than the clouds. They fly fast, low and confidently, because they believe the Thunderbolts do not dare dive after them in rough air. The 56th Fighter Group's P-47 patrol spots the Jabos just after dawn. 4 Thunderbolts bank to intercept from above, spreading out instinctively. Each pilot anticipating the same outcome. The German flight will drop even lower, hugging the treetops to force the Americans into a dive they supposedly cannot sustain. Jabos heading northeast. Treetop height, Blue Leader reports. Keep altitude. Don't drop until they commit. Below, the FW-190s twist between fields, streaking past stone barns and scattering flocks of startled birds. The German leader gives a quick set of hand gestures. Drop altitude, break into the hedgerows, force the Americans to choose between ripping their wings off or giving up the chase. But this time, the Thunderbolts do not hesitate. Their pilots have seen the turbo surge at work. They have felt the sudden acceleration that turns a dive from a descent into a weapon. Blue 2, going down. Blue 3, following. Keep your eyes on your temps. Blue 3, relax. The old girl knows what she's doing. The Americans push their noses down, and the P-47s plunge into the dive. Wind thunders against their canopies. The air thickens. The frames shudder with the familiar vibration that marks the lag, the quiet before the punch. The Jabos see the Thunderbolts dropping and tighten their run, expecting the same old story. The Americans will flatten out, lose boost, and fail to catch them before the hedges offer cover. For a moment, it looks like that prediction will come true. The P-47s seem to settle into the dive with steady but not remarkable speed. Then the Flaw wakes up. Blue 2 feels it first. A sudden muscular surge through the airframe. A growl from the R-2800 as the wastegate snaps wider than intended. The aircraft does not just descend, it lunges. Blue 3's Thunderbolt does the same a heartbeat later, and the two machines shoot downward with a violence that defies every diagram German tacticians have ever drawn. The Jabos realize something is wrong. Their formation wobbles. Panic creeps into their timing. The German leader banks right toward a narrow lane between two hedgerow walls, a maneuver meant to break pursuit by exploiting low-altitude turbulence. but the Thunderbolt behind him is no longer flying a predictable descent curve. It is accelerating at an angle and speed more like a falling weapon than an aircraft. Blue 2 lines up his shot, not from a neat pursuit arc, but from the chaotic geometry created by the surge. The closing distance collapses. The trees blur. The P-47 levels just enough to bring the guns onto the German's tail. A half-second burst tears through the FW-190's rear fuselage, shearing off armor plating and igniting fuel. The German leader's aircraft pitches sideways, clips a treetop, and bursts into flames across a field. The remaining Jabos scatter, each choosing a different direction in a frantic attempt to break line of sight. But the Thunderbolts stay with them. The Flaw continues to pulse through the engines, giving the Americans a pattern of speed the Germans cannot read. Two more FW-190s try to climb out of danger in a steep vertical bank. Normally, at this altitude, that climb would shake a pursuer loose, but the P-47 surges again. Blue 3 races upward after the climbing 190, closing what should be a safe gap. The German stalls first, his aircraft shuddering as airflow breaks over his wings. He never recovers. Blue 3 fires a short burst, and the FW-190 falls backward like a stone kicked from a ledge. The final Jabo tries to run flat across a field, using terrain to mask his movement, but the Thunderbolt descends in a shallow dive that turns brutal once the lag ends. The acceleration spike launches the American back into guns range. A quick burst punches through the German's canopy and sends the aircraft skidding across grass in a violent smear of dirt and metal. When it is over, the Thunderbolts regroup in silent astonishment. 4 dives, 3 kills, 1 escape, and not a single moment where the Flaw behaves like a liability. Back at base, as ground crews hose debris from the cowlings and wipe the guns clean, one pilot sums up the entire engagement with a dry, exhausted laugh. They ran for the hedges, and the Flaw outran them. By summer 1944, the Thunderbolt's Flaw has become something German pilots fear without understanding. They know the P-47 is dangerous in dives. They know their escape calculations keep failing. But they do not know why, because the answer is hidden in a loose wastegate linkage, a delayed turbo response, and a mechanic's notebook that will never be read by Luftwaffe intelligence. The Flaw does not overpower its enemies. It destabilizes their assumptions. German pilots enter each fight believing the dive will save them, believing the climb will shake pursuit, believing the split-second timing drilled into them at flight school will hold up in real battles. The Flaw shatters those beliefs not by overpowering them, but by shifting the clock. A quarter second here, a half second there. A burst of acceleration where none should exist. Each tiny disruption bends their equations until the duel becomes unwinnable. The P-47 does not outturn its enemies. It does not outclimb them. It does not even outdive them in the traditional sense. It outtimes them. And timing, in aerial combat, is the blade that cuts deepest. There is no memo from headquarters acknowledging the discovery. No official change in procedure. No technical directive praising the mechanics who refuse to tighten a linkage that should be adjusted. The truth moves the way truths in war always move, from pilot to pilot, from hardened veterans to cautious replacements, from crew chiefs who trust their instincts to officers who trust the results. By mid-1944, Thunderbolt pilots no longer ask whether the turbo surge is dangerous. They ask only how to feel it coming. Some say the surge feels like the engine taking a breath. Others say it feels like the aircraft bracing itself. A few joke that the Thunderbolt waits for the perfect moment to punch someone. But beneath the humor is a silent shift in doctrine. Pilots begin dropping into dives earlier than usual, confident the Flaw will close gaps faster than calculation suggests. They chase vertical escapes with a kind of stubborn aggression no other Allied fighter attempts. And when confronted by Jabos skimming the hedges, or Bf-109s trying to run for the clouds, Thunderbolt pilots understand something their opponents do not. The Flaw is not unreliable. It is dependable in its unpredictability. German precision has become a liability. Their engines perform flawlessly under ideal circumstances. But war rarely offers ideals. The Thunderbolt, with its radial bulk and industrial plumbing of ducts and linkages, absorbs chaos rather than resists it. It converts sloppiness into energy. It weaponizes lag. It punishes pilots who assume machinery behaves cleanly under stress. And in this ugly, uneven, brutally practical world of mid-1944 air combat, the machine that can survive the most abuse, the machine that welcomes it, dictates the terms of survival. One symbolic image captures this truth better than any sortie report. On a late August evening, after a long escort mission, Rust Carver leans over the open cowling of a battered P-47D and wipes a smear of soot off the turbo housing with the edge of his sleeve. The linkage he has intentionally left loose clinks as he flicks it with his fingertip. Lieutenant Morrison stands nearby, helmet still on, watching the ritual with something like reverence. "What's wrong with it?" Morrison asks. Rust shakes his head. "Nothing's wrong with it. That's the part that keeps you alive." To an enemy engineer, the loose linkage is a defect. To Rust and every pilot who trusts him, it is the link between survival and the wreckage burning in a French field. The Flaw has become part of the P-47's soul, a quirk that flips engagements, rewrites timing, and leaves a trail of German aircraft scattered across Europe. And by the time the Luftwaffe finally understands the truth, it no longer has enough pilots or aircraft left to matter. The story of the Thunderbolt's Flaw is more than a tale about engineering quirks or battlefield improvisation. It is a reminder that war rarely rewards perfection. It rewards adaptability, hard-earned intuition, and the willingness to trust what actually works over what is supposed to work. A loose linkage, a late surge, a mechanic's judgment forged through sleepless nights. Those are the things that shape the P-47's reputation far more than any blueprint. And while German tacticians write their equations with confidence, the Thunderbolt rewrites those equations with fire, speed, and timing no one on the other side sees coming.